How do you force an occupier out of your territory? In the mainland, Ukraine has provided the big answer to that question by meeting Russia's invading forces with a fierce defense and, at times, launching counteroffensives to retake what Russia attempts to steal. However, Crimea is a different story. Ukraine isn't fighting directly on the peninsula. Instead, its strategy is much simpler. Make life so difficult for the 800,000 or so Russians who have moved to Crimea that they have to leave and Putin loses control. October 13th saw Ukraine take another step toward executing that strategy. A giant fireball has erupted over Crimea as Ukraine just broke Russia's backbone. That fireball, the Kyiv Independent reports, was a result of Ukrainian drones striking the largest Russian oil depot in the Crimean city of Feodosia. The strike, which took place overnight on October 13th, was part of a wider strike against several targets in Crimea, and it caused a blaze so massive that Russia couldn't cover up the reality of what really happened. And how could that blaze not be massive? As an unnamed source from Ukraine's security service, or SBU, told the Kyiv Independent, Ukraine's drones took out several massive fuel tanks in one sitting. Drones hit at least 5 tanks. A large-scale fire is recorded on the territory of the oil depot, the source said. And we don't have to take their word for it. There is also footage that is already circulating on social media showing the sheer scale of the blaze that Ukraine sparked. One of those videos has been shared by an unexpected source, a man named Jürgen Naudit, the managing director of an education company who makes it very clear that he stands for Ukraine in his X biography, shared a 5-second clip to X. Feodosia will not receive any gasoline, Naudit says gleefully, while adding that Russia's oil depot had intercepted several Ukrainian drones. That's one way to handle drones, we suppose. Rather than shoot them out of the sky, intercept them with the very targets that Ukraine wants to hit. The shared footage showcases a ferocious blaze, causing massive plumes of smoke to rise into the air. It also looks like it was shot from the window of a building in the city of Feodosia, revealing that Ukraine's strike was so significant that its aftermath could be seen from inside the city itself. More footage is shared by The Sun's YouTube channel, including the 5-second clip Naudit posted to his X account. The Sun also offers a second piece of footage, seemingly shot using a cell phone, that showcases the same scene. The Feodosia oil depot is consumed by flames and smoke billows into the sky. We mentioned earlier that Russia does its best to cover up incidents like this. It can't succeed with what just happened at Feodosia. To make matters worse for Russia, the October 13th strike is one that it should have seen coming. At the very least, Russia should have had more air defenses capable of shooting down drones installed at the depot, because it's not like Russia wasn't warned. Ukraine didn't tell Russia that it was going to target the depot in words, it did it through action, as October 13th represents just one of several strikes against the depot in the last several weeks. The Crimean Wind Telegram channel says that this is the second time Ukraine has hit the Feodosia oil depot in the space of a week. Around midnight, the Feodosia marine oil terminal was set on fire for the second time in the past 7 days, the channel reports. It also offers a few more details about the sheer scale of the blaze. The oil depot burning in Feodosia is clearly visible from space, according to the Crimean Wind Monitoring Group, citing satellite imagery. The scale of the fire is impressive. Thermal signatures show plumes of scorching air above the city and the sea. We said this was a big fire. Apparently, it was big enough to be visible from space. Twice in a week clearly wasn't enough for Ukraine, though. As Euromaidan Press points out in its report on Ukraine's October 13th strike, this is actually the third time that Ukraine has hit the depot in recent memory. Beyond the 2 October strikes, there was another on September 29th. It also notes that the second Feodosia depot strike appears to have been timed to coincide with Vladimir Putin's birthday, which is a clear attempt by Ukraine to send a message. Oil is burning in Crimea, and it seems like there's nothing that Putin can do about it. If there was, Russia wouldn't have let Ukraine hit the depot 3 times in a little over 2 weeks. Each of these strikes has been successful, with each also gradually chipping away at the fuel reserves being stored at the Feodosia depot. Euromaidan Press says that the depot was home to 34 fuel reservoirs before Ukraine started its targeted campaign. There are now only 22 left, and it seems likely that Ukraine will target the depot again before too long. Why wouldn't it? The October 13th strike destroyed 5 of the reservoirs, meaning the 2 earlier strikes managed to take out 7 between them. Russia was unable to stop any of these strikes, and the remaining reservoirs represent big enough targets that Ukraine will think it can hit them again and again. Slowly but surely, Ukraine is chipping away at the Feodosia depot. It won't be long before there's no oil left. The one caveat to all of this is that there is no official word from Ukraine that it carried out the strike, per Newsweek's report on the incident. That's not unusual for strikes involving the SBU. The organization wants to keep its methods a secret from Russia, so it often collectively keeps its mouth shut when major strikes like this occur. When Russia has no official information at all, it's even less likely to be able to conduct the types of air defenses needed to protect Feodosia from future strikes. Ukraine has already taken advantage of these failures 3 times, and it will want to preserve any opportunity it has to do it again. There is at least some level of confirmation, first from the source who spoke to the Kyiv Independent, and then from Russia itself. Beyond the statement in which the source revealed that the SBU had hit 5 Feodosia tanks, the source also made it clear that the SBU was behind the entire strike. The SBU continues to systematically reduce the enemy's military, logistical, and economic capacity to wage war against Ukraine, the source told the Kyiv Independent. That's another standard line from Ukraine. It's been targeting resources, particularly energy-related ones, inside Russia and occupied territory for most of 2025. With each fuel tank burned, Russia has a little less oil it can use on the front lines, serve to its people, or sell to generate money needed for Putin's war. Just as the repeated strikes on Feodosia show Ukraine chipping away at the facility, the wider campaign sees the country chipping away at an oil industry that is absolutely vital for Russia's survival. As for Russia, it's trotted out some of its usual excuses, along with the tactics that it often uses to try to prevent news of such devastating strikes from reaching everyday Russians. In Feodosia, Euromaidan press reports, Ukraine's strikes were powerful enough to disrupt public transportation routes. Train services were delayed for several hours, and the Feodosia authorities made internet service unavailable on the morning after the attack. A common tactic by Russia, limiting internet service makes it more difficult to share real-time footage of a strike or its aftermath. It doesn't stop footage from emerging before the shutdown, as we saw from the videos mentioned earlier, and the internet is eventually restored, enabling sharing once more. Still, it's all a part of Russia's disinformation campaign that it hopes will hide the truth of what happened at Feodosia. Another part of that disinformation campaign is the claim that we've heard many times before. It wasn't drones scoring direct hits that caused the blaze at the Feodosia fuel depot, Russia tries to claim. Rather, these fires occur as a result of Russia being so effective at shooting Ukraine's drones out of the sky. It never makes sense, but it's all Russia has going for it. This time, it was the Russian-appointed Minister of Crimea, Sergei Aksyonov, who came up with the excuses. As a result, a fire started. There are no casualties according to current information. All relevant services are already working on the site. Preliminary reports indicate that the air defenses shot down more than 20 unmanned aircraft, Aksyonov said in a statement. Note the focus on unmanned aircraft being shot down rather than scoring any direct hits. Russia wants the people who read these statements to believe that the aftermath of Ukraine's drone strikes is caused by debris falling out of the sky rather than Ukraine hitting its targets. That isn't the case, of course. But unless Russia feels it can frame Ukraine's achievements as terrorist attacks, it will always focus on shooting drones down rather than those drones doing what Ukraine sent them to do. We can take Aksyonov's words as official confirmation that Ukraine took out 5 fuel tanks at Feodosia. A fire started is an understated way of confirming the massive inferno we see in the footage from the site. The Kyiv Independent adds more figures to Russia's interception claims. According to the outlet, Russia's defense ministry has confirmed that what happened in Feodosia was part of a larger series of strikes that Russia supposedly thwarted. Ukraine sent 103 drones into Russian and occupied territories, the ministry says, all of which were intercepted. Around 40 of those drones went to Crimea, suggesting that the 20 that Aksyonov mentions are just part of a larger horde. We'll come back to that point in a moment. First, let's zoom in a little closer on the Feodosia depot that Ukraine has targeted so many times over the last couple of weeks. We already know that it's the largest depot in the city and that it's rapidly running out of the fuel reserves Russia stores there due to Ukraine's strikes. The Kyiv Independent adds that the depot is located around 155 miles away from Ukrainian-controlled territory, putting it well in range of Ukraine's drones and even some of its long-range missiles. The depot can hold up to 250,000 tons of fuel, much of which goes towards supporting Russia's forces. However, the depot is also a multifunctional facility, the outlet says. It's also used to support the transshipment of Russia's oil products between sea vessels, rail tankers, and road transport. So Ukraine didn't just take out fuel on October 13th. It caused a fire so massive that it'll likely shut down a key logistical hub in Feodosia. Now that we know that the depot can hold 250,000 tons of fuel, we can also do some maths to determine just how much fuel Russia has lost thanks to Ukraine's repeated strikes. We mentioned earlier that Feodosia is usually home to 34 fuel reservoirs, and that only 22 remain after Ukraine's 3 strikes. Assuming each of those reservoirs holds an equal amount, that means each one can store a touch over 7,350 tons of fuel. Feodosia has lost 12 of its reservoirs, which amounts to 88,235 tons of fuel that has burned thanks to Ukraine. That's a lot of fuel that isn't going to make it to the front lines. A little while ago, we mentioned that Russia claims to have shot down 40 drones over Crimea, with 20 of those drones apparently being taken out in Feodosia. That implies that Feodosia's fuel depot wasn't Ukraine's only target on October 13th, and it wasn't. There were two others, both of which are also part of Russia's energy infrastructure, though they serve different purposes than the oil depot. Militarny has the details in an October 13th report. It highlights that the open-source intelligence telegram channel Dnipro Osint has revealed that Ukraine also managed to hit a pair of electrical substations. The first was in Simferopol, where Ukraine took out a 330 kilovolt substation, with the second being a 220 kilovolt substation in Kaffa. The latter has been confirmed by NASA's FIRMS satellite monitoring system, the outlet reports. These substations play a crucial role in occupied Crimea's power setup, Militarny says. They're part of what it calls a power bridge to Crimea that includes several overhead cable transmission lines that connect Crimea to the Russian region of Krasnodar Krai via the Kerch Strait. These power lines connect to substations inside Crimea, from which electricity is distributed through the Crimean peninsula. So Ukraine didn't just take out Russian oil on October 13th. It also tried to cut the power to Crimea, giving the occupying citizens a little taste of what Russia is doing to Ukraine's people. This was an eye for an eye. After all, Russia's attacks have been causing power outages all across Ukraine. Pravda reported on these outages on the same day that Ukraine launched its aerial assault on Crimea, noting that the regions of Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk have been forced to introduce controlled emergency power outages. Sumy, Poltava, and Kirovograd are also dealing with these outages, as are Kharkiv, Chernihiv, and Zaporizhia. Ukraine is trying to hit Russian citizens where it hurts, without killing those civilians with its strikes. Taking out electrical substations in Crimea is a good way to do that, as is destroying fuel reserves stored on the peninsula. That brings us to what all of this means for the Ukraine war moving forward. It would be inaccurate to claim that this is a game-changing attack by Ukraine, no matter how massive the blaze it caused ended up being. This is a death by 1,000 cuts strategy Ukraine is implementing, and the loss of more fuel reservoirs at Feodosia is part of a much wider plan that will eventually force Putin to give up his Ukraine invasion because Russia lacks the resources to complete the takeover of Ukraine. This is more fuel lost for Russia, and it's happened at a time when Russia can ill afford to be losing yet more fuel. Ukraine has launched a concerted campaign against Russia's oil refining and its refined oil products, which include gasoline and petrol over the last couple of months. By October 10th, the commander-in-chief of Ukraine's armed forces, Alexander Syrsky, was hailing Ukraine's achievements in that area. Via a Facebook post, Syrsky said, "Last month, the number of hits on the territory of the Russian Federation was brought to 70. The production of fuels and lubricants, explosives, and other components of the Russian military-industrial complex is being destroyed in the aggressor country. In particular, oil refining in Russia has been reduced by 21%. It's the 70 strikes leading to a 21% reduction in Russia's oil processing that will worry Putin most. It could even be that 21% is an understatement." Just a few days before Syrsky's Facebook post, reports were circulating that Ukraine had shut down about 38% of Russia's oil refining. Whether it's just over a fifth or almost 2/5, the number is far too high for comfort from the Russian perspective. We're also seeing the impact these strikes are having on Russia. As the Kyiv Independent reported on October 8th, Russia has been experiencing gasoline shortages to the point where it's been forced to implement restrictions in several regions. Occupied Crimea is among them, and we'll come back to that in a moment. Other regions experiencing major shortages include Chelyabinsk, Sverdlovsk, and Tyumen, all of which have implemented fuel caps that see customers only being able to buy a fraction of the gasoline they'd need to fill a vehicle's tank. CNN adds that Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has claimed that Russia is now short about 20% of the gasoline that it needs to fulfill the country's domestic needs. Coming back to Crimea, Ukraine is targeting the region specifically for a couple of reasons. We've touched on one of those reasons already. Ukraine wants to make sure that Russian citizens feel the pain that Putin is attempting to inflict on Ukraine. Crimea is a particular sore spot for Ukraine, given that the Russian citizens living there only arrived since 2014, which is when Russia annexed the Crimean peninsula. October 13th saw the latest attempt Ukraine has made to bring that pain to Russia, and it will likely lead to yet more fuel shortages in the peninsula that is racked by them. The Kyiv Independent highlighted these Crimean shortage issues in its report on Ukraine's October 6th strike against Feodosia. It says that a Russian business outlet named Kommersant ran an in-depth examination of 17,000 gas stations throughout Russia's southern federal district. Occupied Crimea is part of that district, and it's been hit hard by gasoline shortages. Around 50% of the gas stations in occupied Crimea and Sevastopol have been forced to halt sales altogether in the wake of Ukraine's repeated attacks. Yet more fuel tanks being taken out will only add to that problem. After all, losing fuel that was meant for the Russian military will force Putin to draw deeper from reserves initially intended for Crimea's people. As those reserves deplete, more gas stations will be forced to shut down or place even stricter restrictions on the Crimean population. However, there's another reason why Ukraine is targeting Crimea with these types of attacks. Crimea is extremely important to Putin, and he wants to ensure Russia maintains control over the peninsula. A large part of maintaining that control comes from the 800,000 Russian citizens who have moved to Crimea since Russia annexed the peninsula. Without those citizens, Putin will struggle to claim that Crimea should rightfully belong to Russia. Herein lies the brilliance of what Ukraine is doing. By conducting such regular strikes against Crimea, it's sending a message to the people that Putin sent to live on the peninsula. They aren't safe anymore, their fuel is being taken away from them, and no matter how much Russia tries to hide it, reports about Ukrainian drone attacks are constant. Putin seems to be able to do nothing about any of this, despite moving more air defenses to Crimea. Eventually, Ukraine hopes something is going to break in the Russian population that lives on the peninsula. They may end up wanting to go back to the Russian mainland. At least there, they won't be subjected to weekly airstrikes against military targets near their homes, and could perhaps even avoid the fuel restrictions that are running rampant in Crimea. Escape may now be on the minds of many of Crimea's Russians, and that's terrible news for Putin. He needs his people to stay put so he can claim control. Ukraine wants them to run, and it's going to keep on hitting Crimea until they do. Right now, Ukraine wants Crimea's Russian population to know that the clock is ticking on their ability to leave. That was suggested by Refat Chabarov, who is the chairman of the Mejlis of the Crimean Tatar people. On June 3rd, Pravda reported that Chabarov had recorded a statement intended for the ears of Crimea's Russian occupiers. As you are already beginning to realize, the illegally built Kerch bridge that connects occupied Crimea to the territory of the aggressor country, Russia, will soon be destroyed, Chabarov said. That claim followed a June 3rd strike on the Kerch bridge by the SBU. Chabarov continued stating, "And you may find yourselves trapped in a kind of pocket. That's why I strongly recommend you urgently leave the peninsula and go back home to Russia, to the places from which you illegally arrived in occupied Crimea. In other words, get out while you still can." As Ukraine proved on October 13th, Crimea is a target that it can hit as often as it wants. Should Ukraine turn its attention back to the Kerch bridge, Crimea's Russians may find that they'll have nowhere left to run because Putin failed to protect them. Ukraine's flying sanctions have struck again, and it is drones that Ukraine relies on to punish Putin for refusing to accept peace. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to the Military Show for more coverage of Ukraine's latest strikes in Crimea. And thank you as always for watching.